2 whole years after the global phenomenon that was Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2, we are finally entering the final build-up to the release of Season 3, otherwise known
as the Culling Games. Due to Jujutsu Kaisen reaching the never-before-seen peaks of Gojo vs Sukuna, and then the almighty lows of the finale, an unfortunate situation arose where the Culling Games arc became slightly overshadowed, at least a lot more than it should have. Nothing else in Jujutsu Kaisen compares to Gojo vs Sukuna, which is an incredibly impressive achievement, but also a hindrance to the rest of the series at the same time. The arc leading up to that fight was inevitably pushed to the back of everybody's minds, which was then made worse by the lackluster finale, leaving a bad taste in everyone's mouth. As a Jujutsu Kaisen content creator and someone who still has a genuine passion and love for the entire series to this day, I have decided to shine a light on what I think is one of shonen manga's most underrated arcs, the Culling Games. Therefore, over the next few weeks, I will be releasing in-depth analysis videos of each Culling Games fight and exploring why this arc not only acts as an incredible build-up for what's to come, but also why it is a beautifully executed arc all on its own. So, if you are beginning to once again feel the hype of Jujutsu Kaisen building and are excited for Season 3, then be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, check out the membership options, and then sit tight for my deep dive analysis of the Culling Games' first major fight, Yuji Itadori vs Higuruma Hiromi. Let's go. First of all, let's very briefly jog everyone's memories up until the events of Yuji vs Higuruma. The immense scale of the Shibuya incident and the sealing of Satoru Gojo inevitably led to immediate panic within Jujutsu society. Therefore, every sorcerer who had found themselves either aligned with Gojo or in Gojo's favor ended up coming together and forming the main Jujutsu Kaisen cast that we follow up until the end of the series. This included the return of the 2 remaining special grade sorcerers, Yuta Akotsu and Yuki Tsukumo, in addition to the recruitment of pseudo special grade Kinji Hakari. After establishing that Kenjaku wishes to hunt down and capture Tengen for a deadly merger, Yuki and Chozo decide to remain with Tengen, while the rest of the group split up to achieve a series of objectives. Firstly, one or more of them must accumulate 100 Culling Game points to add a rule allowing the transfer of points between players, with the hope that it will eliminate the need to kill others and solve the problem of inactive players being exposed to technique removal, otherwise known as death. Secondly, they wish to convince other players to give them their points to add another rule allowing the substitution of a current player with a new player, which will allow them to save Megami's sister, Sumaki Fushiguro. Now, please keep in mind that the first objective of adding a rule allowing the transfer of points stems from Yuji's innate reluctance to kill. Players like Megami, Yuta, and Hakari would likely kill other participating sorcerers without hesitation if that's what they judge needed to be done. Yuji's inner conflict with the idea of killing, though, actually stems from his good nature, his grandfather's death, his rivalry with Mahito, and the recent burden of guilt that Sukuna forced upon him when he laid waste to Shibuya. Keep that in mind because it is a very important theme within the Higuruma fight. After recruiting Hakari, Megami and Yuji enter Tokyo Colony No. 2 as players and then are forcefully split up. Fortunately for them, Hajime Kashimo used his 100 points to create a rule allowing information on other players, including their name, colony, and point value, to be shared with the rest. And after seeing this, Hakari went to deal with Kashimo personally because he managed to figure out that he was the strongest, while Yuji and Megami then went to locate the only other sorcerer with 100 points who had not yet created a rule, Higuruma Hiromi. Now, after beating some fodder and meeting an old school friend who had awakened as a grade 5 sorcerer, Yuji finally found Higuruma's base of operation and entered all alone. Having 102 points, Yuji knew that it meant Higuruma was capable of killing at least 20 sorcerers all alone, and yet he chose to push forward anyway. The first time that Yuji Itadori and Higuruma Hiromi officially meet is when we get that iconic panel of Higuruma in a bathtub, fully clothed, in the middle of a theater. Introductions is something Gege Akutami massively excels at, and I don't think it really gets much better than this introduction, because the page does just immediately captivate you. Higuruma claims that he is trying things he wouldn't usually do, like bathing with his clothes on, making crappy jokes, and pretending to be the money-grubbing lawyer for a change. Pay attention to that last point though, because it is very crucial to understanding Higuruma's character moving forward. Now, Yuji determines that Higuruma might just create the transfer rule willingly, since he hasn't actually created a rule himself so far, and because he is an awakened sorcerer, not a potentially evil incarnated one like Sukuna. However, Higuruma rejects it for a very interesting reason. Being completely ignorant of the Culling Game's true purpose, Higuruma then wishes to see the Culling Game actually continue because it's something completely new. To Higuruma, it is a whole new way of society functioning, which operates around a set of absolute rules instead of operating around the whims of their country's traditional laws and legal system that are created and enforced by corruptible and biased people. He admits that it has faults and is probably a bit too brutal, but he is curious to see how society functions when faced with rules that will indiscriminately punish those who break them with absolute justice. Now, just before I dive deep into the analysis of both Yuji and Higuruma's characters during this fight, I did want to draw your attention to Gege's phenomenal artwork over the course of these chapters. The paneling, the double spreads, and the way he makes all three characters so emotive in their facial expressions is just unreal, and I think it probably peaks during this fight. Anyway, let's move on to the real analysis, which I reckon will blow your mind once you can put it all together. Now, in the build-up to and across the duration of this fight, Higuruma Hiromi was given multiple backstory chapters, which were so well written that he quickly became a fan favorite in the manga. And I suspect the same will be the case when Season 3 reveals this character for the very first time. As a modern-day sorcerer who awakened a curse technique, Higuruma experienced a sudden change in how he saw the world, in the same way that Yuji did upon discovering the world of sorcery. The themes that I find are best explored in Higuruma's character, though, are those of burdens which sorcerers must carry. Not only the burdens of guilt and responsibility, but also the burden of strength, talent, and intelligence, which is often explored in Jujutsu Kaisen as a whole. There is also a great parallel to Yuji, where we can see the clear difference between a new Jujutsu sorcerer who had someone to guide them and a new Jujutsu sorcerer who didn't. Yuji had Gojo to help him adjust to the world of sorcery, whereas Higuruma was completely alone, at least until his confrontation with Yuji Itadori. Higuruma was a gloomy defense attorney in Japan who was generally considered a genius by all he worked with. He had a knack for taking impossible or unwinnable cases, which he claimed was because it kept him sharp and that easy cases would dull the mind. And as much as I do think there was definitely some truth to this, when we see him take the case of a young man accused of murder, we then begin to see that there's actually more to Higuruma's motives. On the surface, the boy is blatantly guilty. He was found with the murder weapon and claimed that he had it because he intended to take it to the police. Yeah, not a likely story, right? He's obviously guilty. But the kid insisted he was innocent, which is when we begin to see Higuruma's doubt in the legal system's ability to deliver real justice. Initially, it was not because Higuruma necessarily believed the boy, but it was because he was able to acknowledge the unlikely possibility that he was telling the truth, and that the legal system was now responsible for determining if that is the case or not. This possibility pushed Higuruma to take the case and look deeper into it, which is when he found more and more evidence suggesting that the boy truly was innocent. Long story short, the poor and vulnerable boy's workplace didn't actually allow employees to make calls to emergency services because it would disrupt the neighbors, which is why he then wanted to take the weapon to the police directly. He was also seen on CCTV cameras in a store at the estimated time of death. With this information, slowly but surely Higuruma did start to truly believe he was innocent and put a very solid case together. After an initially successful trial, a retrial was called, and because of no new evidence being provided, in addition to no other suspects being presented, the court ruled a potentially innocent man guilty and sentenced him to death. Sorry, hi, I'm making this in the edit. I kind of lied. I said death for dramatic effect, but I'm realizing now by what I put on screen that he was just sentenced to life in prison. I mean, it's pretty much the same as I've fully killed the immersion here, haven't I? I'm sorry, continue.
Okay.
This is when Higuruma saw the flaw in their system. It all came down to money, influence, and power, of which Higuruma did not have enough of to actually force another trial. That was until his brain was adjusted to allow for the use of curse techniques thanks to Kenjaku's actions in Shibuya. After that moment, the genius lawyer known as Higuruma Hiromi awakened the power he needed to deliver what he thought to be absolute and complete justice. However, his actions were more so driven by emotion and rage as he straight up killed the judge and the prosecutor's attorney. Now, Gege made sure to emphasize that a normal, money-hungry, ambitious, and greedy man would not end up in the position that Higuruma found himself in. A man like that would not take such a case, and he would not be able to see the possibility of the boy's complete innocence in the first place. But Higuruma was burdened with intelligence and talent, a curse that let him see things the way they are, and it effectively depressed him. Talent and genius is a curse in Jujutsu Kaisen, even though it manifests in different ways. Gojo is cursed by it, Yuta is cursed by it, Sukuna is cursed by it, Megumi is supposedly cursed by it, and now Higuruma is too. All of the characters that have these themes of depression and isolation, however they might manifest, all have the common factor of having this natural talent and intelligence. When you come to see this theme in Higuruma's character, it just makes it hit that much harder later on when Higuruma is stated to have potential rivaling that of Satoru Gojo. There is a direct parallel there. And just like Gojo, Higuruma sees the truth of the world, but has no real influence over the traditional, corrupt, and greedy higher-ups that sit at the top of their respective societies. Unlike Gojo, however, who chose the path of nurturing the next generation, Higuruma followed Gojo's alternative plan and killed said higher-ups. The curse of that knowledge and the ability to see things how they truly are is a depressing way to live that can lead you down a much darker path if you don't have anyone there to guide you. Higuruma was alone, and he became a killer. Geto was alone, and he became a killer. Sukuna was alone, and he became a killer. Yuta was not alone, and he became a prodigy who would help change their society for the better. Do you see the difference? Being the honored one though, Gojo was the exception to the rule of isolation, leading you down a dark and evil path. He witnessed what loneliness can do to someone firsthand when Geto defected, and Gojo then deliberately rejected that path, choosing instead to nurture and cultivate real change in the world. Unlike Geto and Sukuna though, it's not too late for Higuruma. He could still reject that darker path just as Gojo did if he just had someone there to guide him. And after only a few weeks of being a sorcerer, Higuruma's guide would appear, and he would save Higuruma from that path in the same way that Satoru Gojo had done for so many others, including for the man in question. That man, of course, being Yuji Itadori. As Gege amazingly shows in this fight, Yuji was slowly becoming a guide for others long before Gojo even expressed his desire for Yuji to be the one to carry on his dream. It's truly a beautiful piece of writing that does end up going full circle, so congratulations Gege, it's really just incredible. Let's put the themes aside for a moment though, because I also want to analyze the fight itself and why I think it's one of the most entertaining fights in the series, despite not being a typical powerhouse battle. I've already glazed Gege's drawing ability enough, so I won't get into that too much, but what I do think Gege really excelled at across the entirety of the Culling Games arc is the choice of matchups. The Culling Games is similar to a tournament arc, but instead of it being a series of 1v1s which can get very repetitive and predictable, Gege designed it in a way that allows for complete unpredictability and a massive variety of different ability interactions at completely different skill levels. Gege's genius strategy for making this tournament arc immune from becoming repetitive was not only by making it a free-for-all, but also by carefully designing the perfect opponent and matchup for each of the Jujutsu High sorcerers. This aspect of the Culling Games, I think, has gone very criminally underrated. You will only realize how perfect the matchups are when you try to think about how things would have gone if Yuji, Maki, Yuta, and Hikari had actually gone to different colonies. In this case, Yuji ended up facing Higuruma, someone who had only recently discovered sorcery just like Yuji. But it goes much deeper than that, because it is definitely no coincidence that the very first proper fight Yuji has following the brutal events of the Shibuya incident is against a man of the law, who wields the Judgment Curse technique. This interaction is how Yuji confronts the guilt that has been eating him up ever since Shibuya. Now, Higuruma's natural genius and talent allowed him to actually reverse engineer the basics of cursed energy and cursed energy reinforcement from his newly manifested curse technique. A technique that, much like Hikari's, comes with a ready-made but non-lethal domain expansion. Higuruma summons a terrifying Shikigami called Judgment and expands a domain called Deadly Sentencing, which takes the form of a courtroom. As Yuji soon comes to learn, all violence within the courtroom is forbidden. The accused is placed on a stand and is presented with a crime that they are then accused of committing by the Judgment Shikigami. The Shikigami knows absolutely everything about you and everything it needs to know for the case, including evidence that will be held against you in the future. However, neither Higuruma nor the accused know what is actually inside of the evidence slip until the accused makes a confession or denies the crime. And therefore, when accused of any crime that they have committed in their lifetime, they have three options. They can confess, deny, or stay silent, with each one having benefits or drawbacks completely dependent on what the evidence slip says. Gege makes the genius decision of actually starting off with something light-hearted and insignificant by making Judgment accuse Yuji of going to a pachinko parlor while underage. It's a very minor crime, it's not that big of a deal. Yuji kind of stresses about it a bit, but then attempts to claim that he is innocent, knowing full well that he's actually guilty, by saying that he just wanted to use the bathroom. But unfortunately, the evidence slip showed Yuji at the cash register, meaning that he is found guilty. What would normally happen is the domain would close and the accused cursed technique is then confiscated, which in itself makes cursed energy temporarily harder to control. However, since Yuji has no technique in the first place, his entire stock of cursed energy was confiscated instead, meaning he had nothing but raw hands left over. And this is where you really begin to see why it is such a perfect matchup, because if there is one sorcerer who could still throw hands despite having no access to cursed energy, it is Yuji Itadori. While attacking Yuji relentlessly with his shape-changing gavel, Higuruma seems to realize that Yuji is no ordinary person and that his raw strength is simply terrifying. Before locking in and stomping Yuji though, our main character has a genius idea and calls for a retrial, which immediately forces the domain back open and applies the no violence rule. Now, remember what I said about Gege making the first crime light-hearted and unserious as a little warm-up? Yeah, well that kind of comes back around here because the next accusation causes the entire tone of the fight to take a massive shift. Judgment accuses Yuji Itadori of mass murder in Shibuya on October 31st. With no filler in between, Gege then drops one of the most impactful and dark panels of Yuji Itadori in the entirety of the story. With a perfectly straight face and absolutely no hesitation, Yuji simply says, "Yeah, I did that. I'm not lying and I won't deny it." Not only does this moment shift the entire tone in a much darker direction for the reader, but it's also the first time that we truly get to see how Yuji feels about what happened there since his mental breakdown. The lack of hesitation and immediate bluntness make it very clear that he takes full responsibility for what happened and genuinely believes it was his fault in some way. Yuji Itadori feels like he killed those people himself, and it's been eating him up from the inside all this time. Which again is why this is the perfect matchup to put Yuji in following Shibuya in order to really communicate Yuji's feelings of guilt to us. The way this moment stands in stark contrast to the first lighthearted and unserious accusation also just makes it hit that much harder. It really is very well written. Not only does this build on Yuji's character though, but it lends massive development to Higuruma at the same time, which then in turn leads to the progression of the main plot when Higuruma eventually makes the rule that Yuji requested, but more on that in a second. So after confessing to the crime, Judgment looks absolutely enraged in one of the best panels I think Gege has ever drawn. The Shikigami then hands out the most extreme sentence possible: death. A sword of pure light then forms in Higuruma's hands, and it is a sword capable of killing anybody it cuts without exception. A sword he would then ruthlessly swing at Yuji as a punishment for his crimes. Higuruma's initial reaction is to just carry out justice and kill Yuji for what he did in Shibuya. The longer Higuruma worked as a defense lawyer, the more he began to see both the accused and the prosecutors as weak and ugly, until he was so consumed by this feeling that he felt that way towards everybody, including Yuji Itadori. Higuruma saw that humans have flaws, he saw that they are ugly, he saw that they have unique weaknesses that other animals do not have, and he began to despise them for it. And he felt this exact same way about Yuji Itadori. At least that was until some new information was revealed to him. After a short time, Higuruma finds out the contents of the evidence slip provided by Judgment. It wasn't revealed straight away because Yuji pleaded guilty, but after learning the information inside, Higuruma's entire perspective shifted. After learning that Yuji pleaded guilty to a crime he did not commit but felt genuinely responsible for, Higuruma remembered that he actually used to value the flaws and weaknesses unique to humans because it also allowed for other uniquely beautiful things like redemption, justice, and empathy. He was reminded of exactly why he became a lawyer in the first place. In other words, Yuji saved Higuruma from going down that dark, lonely, and cursed path simply by being a genuinely pure and good human being, which in itself shows that Yuji is a human, not a curse, and that he is not guilty of the crimes an evil like Sukuna commits. Therefore, he expels the sword, creates the transfer rule for Yuji, and quietly exits, saying that he will ponder his actions and eventually turn himself into the authorities when the Culling Games ends. In conclusion, Yuji vs Higuruma is the perfect opening fight for the Culling Games. Not only do we get our first glimpse of how Gege meticulously designed each Culling Games matchup to create the perfect dynamic between each party involved, but we also get to experience beautiful character writing, a deeper exploration of Jujutsu Kaisen's themes, along with loads of hype moments, cool artwork, and raw aura. All of those factors come together to create a truly beautiful story which allowed Jujutsu Kaisen to reach the heights that it did. However, Yuji vs Higuruma is not the only fight in the Culling Games that is this well executed and well written. Almost every major fight in the arc is just as good for the exact same reasons, without becoming repetitive or stale, so make sure to stay tuned in for my analysis of the rest of the fights. But that, my fellow nerds, is the end of Yuji vs Higuruma, Jujutsu Kaisen's most underrated fight.